Hey everybody, Ben here from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios, and this is everything you need to know about art papers in less than 7 minutes. Now sometimes the right paper can seem a little bit obvious, like watercolor paper, drawing paper, or printmaking paper, but other times it can seem less obvious, like vellum or tracing paper. So let's start out with a few main types. Newsprint is smooth, cheap, and thin. It's also not super archival, and it's really great for practice that you can just rip sheets out and throw them away. It's also got a little bit of color to it. It's sort of a off-white, a little bit of a yellowish brown color. Sketch paper has a little bit more texture than newsprint, but is still relatively smooth. And its lightweight properties make it great for pen and graphite. Do keep in mind though, because it is relatively thin, it won't take thicker, heavier media really at all. Our next grade up is drawing paper. Drawing paper has a little bit more texture and is really good for the complete drawing from start to finish. Its extra texture handles graphite, charcoal, as well as pastels very, very well. Next up we have Bristol paper. Now Bristol is usually the #1 choice for comic book artists, as well as manga and anime style artists, because it's really great for pen and ink as well as markers. Bristol usually comes in two different varieties, smooth and what they call vellum, which is actually slightly more textured than the smooth variety. Both varieties, however, are very smooth to the touch and are much thicker papers that hold up very well to a variety of media, including certain things like watercolor and acrylics as well. So if you're looking for something for inks, like a wet media drawing, then Bristol is the paper for you. Next up, we have a classic and old standby, watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is great for wet media, specifically watercolor, because that's what it's made for. It's usually very textured and slightly thick of a paper. Think of something like cardstock. And most watercolor paper comes in 3 different varieties: cold press, hot press, and rough. Cold press watercolor is what most of us are used to working with. It's a nice balance between smooth and rough, and it's very easy to work with. Hot press watercolor paper is generally very, very smooth, and it's really great for people who love fine detail work. And rough watercolor paper, as the name suggests, is very rough, extremely textured, can be a little bit difficult to work with, but it's really great for landscapes and special effects. Regardless of what kind of watercolor paper you choose though, you're going to want to tape down your edges while you're working, otherwise you're going to get a lot of unnecessary buckling, especially for those artists who use a lot of water. Next up, we've got pastel paper. As the name suggests, it's great for soft, dry media like charcoal, pastel, or Conte crayon, and it's usually toned as well. The thickness is about the same as Bristol paper, but it's much more textured like watercolor paper. It's also a really great choice for heavy charcoal. Now that we've covered our basics, let's take a look at a few specialty papers. Now if you're someone who's into design, specifically architectural design, you might be familiar with tracing paper or vellum. Tracing paper is really good for practice, image transfers, and shortcuts in the middle of bigger projects. Vellum, however, is more of a designer's medium. Both papers have some level of a non-absorbency, which is really sort of an interesting way to work with a relaxed version of markers. Check out this video over here from designer Scott Robertson, as he uses Copic markers to really sort of do an interesting technique with both marker and vellum tracing paper. The next specialty paper, unfortunately, I don't have around here in the studio, but it's canvas paper. Canvas paper is designed to look like the vertical and horizontal weave of a canvas. It's great for practice and design-oriented painters, but keep in mind, because it is a paper, it's not going to take a whole lot of water. Next, I want to talk about toned variations of different papers. Most sketch and drawing papers, as well as a handful of others in that mix, come in toned variations, something of a light brown, to give a different sort of feel to a book, especially a sketchbook, for those of you really intimidated by a blank white page. Tone variations are often very popular with character and portrait artists. A toned surface is also easier on the eyes, especially if you sketch outside a lot, and that bright sunlight will reflect off of the white page and right into your face. Now this next one isn't so much a specialty paper as it is a little bit less common, and that is printmaking paper. I don't know a whole lot about printmaking paper myself, except that it is really designed for both block prints as well as printing presses. The texture and thickness of printmaking paper is very similar to vellum Bristol paper. Finally, let's take a look at boards. The illustration board is a great smooth surface that works well for ink and graphite. However, it doesn't have the texture or is really designed for a lot of heavier media, like watercolor or acrylics. But that doesn't mean you can't try. Personally, I've used acrylics on illustration board, and it works, but the more and more media you put onto it, and the wetter it gets, the more it starts to warp and bend. If you're looking to avoid the whole warping and bending thing altogether, you should probably take a look at hardboards. Hardboards are usually sold near the wood panels or canvas in your local art store, And the main reason for this is they're a great surface for wet media like oils and acrylics. However, some smooth and textured variations are also really great for both mixed media and dry media as well. The best thing about hardboards is they're both ready to frame or ready to hang if you get the cradled variations. So with all these different papers to choose from, you might think, which one's right for me? Well, it's important to note the texture variable for each one. When you're at your local art store, you can usually flip open the sketchbooks on display and kind of rub your hand across the page and feel the texture for yourself to see if it's something that you'd want to work with. Keep in mind though, the greater the texture of the paper will also affect your drawing. So for a lot of your basic and main papers, you want to look for brands like Strathmore, Canson, and your main store brand. For me, that's Utrecht. The Moleskine company also makes a lot of really popular sketchbook lines. And in terms of watercolor paper, if you really want to get the really high class stuff, there's a company called Arches that makes the best watercolor paper in the world. However, it is also really, really expensive. Although Arches, I think, does also make printmaking paper as well. But again, very high quality, a little bit on the pricey side. Now I've covered a lot of stuff here today, so let's take a quick review. Well, there are a lot of different kinds of papers: drawing paper, sketch, Bristol, watercolor. You probably want to start out with something simple like drawing or sketch paper. And as you explore different media, such as watercolor, inks, or acrylics, it's also important to explore different kinds of papers those media go with. And when you are deciding to try something new, it's important to do your research about that paper before you decide to buy it. So I hope this video has been useful to you in some way, and open your eyes a little bit about maybe some new and interesting papers that you can try in your own studio and in your own home. Remember to subscribe for more art videos like this one, and this has been from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios. See you guys next time.